all, thank you so much to Florida Drupal Camp and the awesome, hosts and organizers for having me and asking me to keynote. It's been an awesome time. And thank you to all of you for attending. Structure enables flexibility at scale. Content modeling for useful components. I wish I could tell you this is the only mouthful slide, but it's just a lot of word salad that I have for you today. I'm very excited. So as a user experience strategist, I create a lot of content models. And I know I'm coming from a content strategy perspective, and not everybody is, but I think this can be related to many roles. Aaron Schrader is another strategist who likens us all the time to architects and uses this metaphor of creating blueprints for homes. So imagine we're all designing a house tailored to your client's needs. Not just any house, it's whether code, style, taxonomy. We're making systems that grow with those who live in them. So sometimes we build and launch this beautiful house and everyone's happy, right off into the sunset. But maybe it's not built to last, or maybe it's lived in hard. So 1 month later, you get a call because something's broken, they say. It's in the basement, they say. They want you to come over. So when you go down to investigate in this metaphorical blueprint of our product, the whole basement is full of alphabet soup. They have filled your beautiful website or product with soup, and now you have so many questions. First of all, how dare you? Next, how did that even begin to occur? Eventually, how did you get that much alphabet soup? So this is, I've labeled things that deserve credit with citations. This is just slop from AI, but it's a bunch of toys floating around in alphabet soup in a basement. So these homeowners have managed to create problems for which we have no contingencies, problems that might not even be possible to reverse. So before long, the house can fill up with similar madness and components just pushed to their edge. Architects and homeowners point fingers at each other like a bunch of Spider-Men, and you end up with a digital product that's hard to use. So again, as a user experience strategist, I like to ask why a lot or take a broader approach. So when people say the problem is the basement, I'm like, maybe there's another problem here. So when people say our components aren't flexible enough, I'm taking a broad approach here as well. And I don't know that it's always a feature thing. I think the problem is usually component adjacent. It's living in the foundational models that we start with and whatever we pour in at the end. So I've been there. I've limited things. I've made things that are limiting, certainly broken things. And more importantly, I have found some really wild, MacGyvered, soupy solutions inside my proverbial homes, sometimes just weeks later. So I could leave it at that and do that as my introduction. I'm a soup finder because I'm not sure if I've tortured the metaphor enough yet. So really quickly, my name is Marissa Epstein. I have hybrid skills in content strategy and architecture through user experience design, so discovery to QA, and an accessibility certification. I spent 11 years at Lullabot working mostly on state government projects within Drupal, and now I consult as design lead for Peak Digital. And I'm open to new projects. And I'm pretend like I didn't put that in there, oops, but I totally did. So Iowa and Georgia are two of the 4 states in my portfolio, and I'm using both to illustrate concepts today. These 2 large-scale platforms served, and these are rough, a combined total of over 150 government agencies and 14 million residents. I was proud to contribute to both, and not because of, user experience or strategy awards, but because we created systems that authors actually grew excited to use to a degree that surprised me, because we were able to create unified systems, not just under the hood, but on the front end, meeting wildly different needs, all with this single source of truth. So whether it was selecting components or display modes or other options, the platform created rich customization without sacrificing other things. If you were here for Amy June's talk, I related a lot to some of the things that can go wide for accessibility. So hopefully those gave you a little bit of hope. My goal is to offer some hope and guidance around how the structure affects our components. My agenda here will review common pitfalls, practices, principles, and proof, and any other words I start with P that I can put into my sides. And this is a keyboard of all P's. So, problems. Let me walk through some of the common imbalances with structure and content. The first one, not imposing limits or starting too open. You need structure for content repurposing to work, but if you provide too much flexibility, you can't take that back and make changes later. So the platform needs guidelines for where these boundaries go, and that's up to us. This is a balance, like I'm saying, can't be too far in either direction. You're going to see me do this a lot with my hands. If you don't set a character limit, all your titles will be too long. Just an example that I think is pretty common, and a design may break, and maybe it's too late because either people have already entered that content or you haven't been considering legacy content. So like, now what? Are we going to just rewrite the titles of hundreds of pieces of content? The image that I have here is just a really nasty looking HTML coded website. The next problem is requiring too much or too little. If everything is required, an author who needs to urgently post something might just not post at all, or they may use the less restrictive basic type that lacks the structure to feed into the components and lists that we've planned so nicely for them. If nothing is required, let's take alt text as an example. So if that's optional, we've told our authors essentially that website accessibility is all optional, and I think we know what will happen in that situation. The image in this case, I just wanted to grab a couple of fields that are all required and might not make sense to all authors. Modeling for one use case, or the flip side, a million. So again, firsthand. The modeling for one use case can happen when one audience is actually more important, or they're just more represented at the table, like a volume problem. You can also fall into the trap of assuming the best case scenario and working on a budget and missing a valid use case that covers a dozen or more people, or authors. I don't mean just users. The flip side is also a trap. So, a million use cases, a million features. If you listen to every author who insists that this is a special case, you end up with the Homer Simpson car, which has so many features that nobody wants to use it, and that's the picture I've added here. Duplicating instead of relating. I'll talk more about relying on relationships and references, but this is the problem of when they're ignored. So imagine duplicating all like you all understand like CMSs, so I don't have to get super into that, but you still have authors copy pasting the contact at the bottom of a page in the body text field instead of using an actual entity reference or a type to relate, and then the office moves or one person leaves and someone has to track down every instance that needs updating, and they may or they may not. The image here is just duplicated pop-ups to the point where they had to take a different angle. My last problem is inflexibility versus configurability, or the wrong things are configurable. So as a former UI designer, and I resonated a lot with this in Amy June's talk as well, like it really scares me to imagine editors picking colors for fonts and for backgrounds and putting images in and removing the white space they don't like and changing the font so that the H3 is bigger than the H1. Obviously it's an opportunity for legibility issues and accessibility issues and like my alphabet soup metaphor. But the other hand, limits can cause horror stories too, so I saved this one for last. I worked with an agency that resisted the state's Drupal platform for 10 years because they wanted full control of the design. It was like they didn't have the right drop shadows, like it was this kind of thing. So they hand code each page of their website, and all of the editors needed HTML and CSS proficiency. So that'll show us. The image that I have here is just a drop-down in Figma that I found really helpful that gives me one option. you're hearing me do these silly things with my hands. There's a lot of not enough, or on the flip side, or too much. So I wanted to just point out these are Goldilocks problems, which is a very common content strategy problem and comes back to our blueprint being specific metaphor. This is another reason why content strategists say it depends all the time. But the Mecha Godzilla on my laptop is saying it depends because somebody else made a sticker of it. It wasn't even me. I just really appreciated that because the answers aren't in a talk like this. They're within the needs of your clients and their users. Okay, let's take a water break. Processes to help could be a whole talk, but I didn't want to focus on this like a bunch of case studies. My hope is to show a couple points at different phases where there might be something that you could inject to correct some of these paths if you need it. At the highest level, this process is discover, model, and iterate. So we'll go a little deeper, and then I'll go too deep. So one, explore ideas with real authors in workshops, etc. Review a variety of real content. And then 2, model smart, like SMRT, I guess, with intentional and iterative flexibility. And 3, iterate, especially with design, to validate before code. So I have a couple bullets for each of these phases. First of all, workshops. I kind of can't get up at a camp and not talk about doing workshops because I like that. And so this was really helpful working with content authors from multiple agencies, both remote and in person, with a couple different goals. But this step matters because people resist what they don't understand. But if they participate a little bit, now they're embracing something that they helped create. So in this image, I have, obviously high quality cell phone picture of a table. So I could do better there. But I wanted to just show these 2 printouts right on top of each other because we did these 2 workshops very quickly with an agency. They left, we did the next one with the next agency. So on the bottom there is essentially a type tray printout. So you know this when you're in Drupal. When you want to create a new node, what do you see? And this was early days, so we were working on little thumbnails and wireframes and describing the purpose within that description. So we printed out our robust type tray version with its icons and all of that, and we asked participants. We had a big list of common needs. Which of these would you start with if you were making X? What if you suddenly had this emergency? Which of these are you using? In that first set of workshops, the very first person got caught up on something confusing that I wrote, and we made a new version on the spot, and we're able to clean that up pretty quickly, and it's pretty cheap. Second, we also ran this component flashcard workshop. So I was going to do that with everyone today, and I think it was going to be a little too chaotic. So I at least have your picture for you today. So these are literal flashcards with Sharpie, and these little kind of wireframe style, and it's just an 11 by 17 piece of paper that a friend laminated for me. So we're using dry erase markers, and we have our little frame, and we can pull from these components that we already believe will work for this model, and then if they have a really specific part of content they want to inject, we can just use a marker and label that. We take a picture, and not only have we been testing our platform and our component library, but we're building wireframes for some of our loudest agencies, which I like. So we learned which components were used most, which were exciting versus intimidating. We identified gaps where multiple people asked for the same thing, and we were starting to see places where they were already asking for flexibility, so we could flag those for our display modes later on. But yeah, the goal here again, seeing wildly different needs met or not met and being able to iterate by our system. Okay, that was a big one. Auditing existing content, I have said this to probably too many clients. It's kind of like when I'm going to go root through your underwear drawer. So I'm going to use Screaming Frog, and I'm going to go through your stuff and site crawl the the HTML, but also the PDFs, and like how many files you have and how big those files are, and if your site structure works, and how your naming is consistent or not, and the taxonomy in use or not in use. And I also love to look at how components are being used. So it kind of the joke for me is I'm kind of finding your unmentionables, and I end up on my way to the on-site, and someone tells me what their site is about, and I can kind of smile and say, yeah, I know. And you have like 14 years of blog posts. So not that that's obviously my first reaction, but just to say that we're starting from different levels, and we can really jump in to what they like, what needs work, because I'm not starting from the beginning. I'm also finding how the current system was limited and how authors had already broken the rules that were in place. And that's a really great place for me to start to make better rules. This is an image. I thought it was funny that I was breaking up all the slides with text with images of text. So this is an example of a content audit with a little introduction kind of cut off there on the back. But this is just an example that was sorted by page title line length. So I wanted to see how many titles would break a given design. I wanted to have this when I'm having this conversation with the designer, but I just want to know the longest content that someone's going to try to put in. Like I've said, I think earlier, I'm looking for the edge cases and the common patterns so I can capture those for later. Okay. Second phase of our process, modeling, into our building phase. This is actually kind of a surprisingly philosophical phase. My boss and I used to describe it as staring at the wall. So we're determining the right specificity of nouns. Is this a contact? We were just hearing about this in another talk. Is this a person? Staff is too restrictive because there are board members. So we're just defining our content types by the purpose of the information. And I know there are so many that are really common, and we're not saying, wow, events are content types in maybe the same way, but especially when you're getting into a particular product, you're defining their level of granularity. You know, is a service and a program the same thing, or is there a difference? Just as an example. I would also add here, when we're labeling these content types, just to not prescribe a form factor. This isn't about this component is a hero for homepage if it goes in the middle of landing pages also, and things like that. So I just wanted to I know these aren't the highest resolution, but I just wanted to show an example of ways that we were grouping this. This is a great example of just our list of content types as we were drafting, and the image on the right side is actually split up by content and micro content. I know that there's ways to sort of filter and look at just your favorites, but I wanted to show that this is for Georgia, it's a pretty large list, and there's a lot to differentiate between. So we started identifying these content types for anything with an important distinction or variation. As I mentioned, our events, our maybe a course, a recipe, a service. And then we went back through those typical and atypical samples and test that list. So does everything fit here? Do we forget something? Is that phase 2, or is this a problem? Okay. Plan relationships is something that we start at a pretty high level. Who owns what can repeat? Can there be multiples of these? What's top dog? This is a model showing a general, it's domain model just showing the content types that we were introducing for the system, what the categories were we were describing them in. There's a couple relationships, and then you can see the graying out as sort of a phase 1 and phase 2. So we're having conversations at this point around what's the difference between a basic page and a news page? A landing page has almost everything. Why doesn't it have that one thing? No, that's on purpose. We're differentiating that from something else, and just being very intentional about which components are appearing. As we're getting more granular about that, it could be as literal as a matrix like this. So what we're looking at is page types on the left and micro content on the top, and just defining exactly what's allowed to go where based on need. So contact is something that makes sense. whereas, I think we ended up having it on everything, so it's not even shown as an option, but, maybe a giant promo or a statistic is not always appropriate. Setting constraints is next, and I spoke a little bit about this. There can be a push-pull between the content that you already have that's too long, your desire to make things a certain way and formatted in the future, what you want to allow that exists, and what a designer wants it to be instead. So I think we have to let flexibility happen, go back to just good old-fashioned reality and how some of these samples are made. And so one example of a solution I wanted to note here is that sometimes, let's say you have a designer that says, just make it one line. And you're like, well, some of these are really important, rich experiences that need more than that. So one solution was 2 descriptions. Maybe one of them is only 100 characters, and you can get your, hot cards, but then you can also have one that is expanded when you're engaging with it and giving you a lot more. I also look at the display modes here and kind of coming back to that. This is really something that is happening in collaboration with design, but I wanted to note that as part of our constraints. Where are we allowing different backgrounds? How many? It doesn't need to be this hex color. It's just nice to know which lists are even going to have display modes. So at one point I thought I had that covered, and then we looked at a listing of contact cards, and it wasn't a contact list, it was a contact card. So now the directory of 120 people is bonkers. It's 30 pages or something. And so we obviously needed a different display mode there. Okay, the last one in modeling is beefy. So the data dictionary is the big source of truth. This is, for a nerd that loves spreadsheets, this is the spreadsheet. So we're capturing decisions like requirements, granularity, details, help text, and trying really at this point to codify any of that flexibility, any of those boundaries. This is sort of the last stop before we're in Drupal. This is another one just kind of showing some samples of it. So within the Iowa documentation, there are content types, micro-content media, with sort of an intro wiki here. And then on the right, I'm showing just part of, just the part of the width and part of the depth of the details around an event. So what's required and optional, cardinality, so can there be single, multiple, does that have a limit, what is it, display variations, on and on and on. So if I am modeling an event, before I do that, I've done my my creepy audit, and I know a lot about their events and things that it looks like from the outside, and I've probably already talked to them about what's not working with that platform now. Our last process phase, iteration. Hopefully you have been catching things while you're building, there's no soup leaks. There are probably deprioritized features to revisit. There are probably some new patterns that have emerged from your first launch and real use, and so you start with these feedback loops. And there's a bunch of them. But the last thing I really wanted to touch on here is this validation loop with especially design, as well as development, of course. But it's not only good communication, it's really improving the end product when you're working very closely back and forth with that data model and that ultimate display. So I found that the data dictionary is hard to use for this. It turns out not everybody likes staring at this spreadsheet on a bright screen until their eyes bleed. So I have done something else, which is not very revolutionary, but I like it, which is just simplifying that big nasty thing down into a simple table and then dropping that right into Figma, because that's where my designers work. They don't want to go in my file. They don't care if I drop little tables, and I joke around like poop, because there's even a poop sticker. And so this is pretty much simplifying a different content type, how do I, and saying you gotta have all these things, but one of them is somewhere else, And these are all optional, and can you show a display mode or two? And so I've just put it next to a real page showing that example. But now it's simpler, it's right next to where they're working, and they're stress testing the constraints with me. I love when a designer tells me I forgot a character count and I can improve my model. Or they want to push back on the 2 descriptions and we can talk about it, and then we both feel good about it, hopefully. So continuing to update or change these concepts, again, are all in cycles where developers are just getting familiar with it, they're just getting started. So the sooner, the cheaper. This is pretty much the continue, rinse, repeat slide. So as you're gathering feedback from actual use, patterns continue to emerge, hopefully more opportunities, and you can plan way more flexibility on those components because you've set that structure in your phase 1. So as example, Iowa had 1 set of components and page types to launch, and the complicated ones in the 2nd phase, and expanded a lot of things beyond functionality, such as color palettes. We were able to launch on time and then actually come back and meet some needs beyond that. So those were on sometimes a nicer timeline. I know that we don't all have that luxury, but my hope is that this next section of principles can guide any project. One, establish baselines of rules and freedoms. Before documenting granular features, decide at a higher level what types of rules and options that you'll incorporate. So you start with a broad brush and capture places to revisit later, some of that flexibility. This is just so bright. This is just an example that I drafted, but here I've already mentioned how scared I am of authors changing design tokens. So that's in the can't, that's just right out. But I want to think about what they can do. So this is optional fields, but it's also selections and toggles for layout and color and placement. So optional fields can provide that flexibility, and I know I was talking earlier about that urgent poster. This is really that other half where someone wants those context-specific enhancements in layout and stuff. I'm going to talk more about the requirements shortly, so I'll skip my must here. This is just a quick visual example of one component and its various styles. I believe that for some of these, we started with a single background color or a single layout, and then we're able to go from there. I really like this example because sometimes the visual is really important, sometimes it's really bad stock photography, or it's the same logo 6 times, and being able to show topics this way, alternate backgrounds, even showing hierarchy of information. There's a nice point of control in this one lever for our authors. So that flexibility over time leads me to number 2, start with restrictions and loosen them later. So we want to launch with constraints and then add flexibility as patterns emerge. And this is kind of a how much rope you start with because you can't take it back. One comedian put it this way: you can always eat more, you can never eat less. So I thought that was simple enough. This is one of the things I mentioned earlier, but in subsequent years you can add more flexibility like these color palettes. So I believe we started with 1, and then based on needs and actual brands within the state, I think we ended up with 6. So this is an admin dropdown. There's no mainlining CSS. Once we get enough feedback. 3, anything that needs consistency needs to be required. Again, back to 1 and our baseline. Where can we draw lines for what is non-negotiable? So coming back to that sort of must, this is just a draft that I'm putting up here. This is not my dogma, but I think it's up to you to decide where your principles are and where your budget is. And so for me, there's some things that seem really universal, but others you'll have to decide. I would say pages need titles. They probably need some content, some metadata for search. Images need at least a file, or a URL, and that alt text. We know accessibility must always be considered. And then some of the requirements are going to come from those design collaboration constraints, like the character limits I mentioned. This is an image of just a single content type, a landing page with a very minimal and robust version of the same page. So I try to make sure that both versions hold up, so our urgent poster can do what they need, and someone who wants to get really fancy can do that as well. I had often called this basic and extra guac. A friend of a friend wrote a book called Guac is Extra and So Am I, and so the strategists were all using that for a while. But I recently heard plain bagel and everything bagel, and I liked that. So my point with this visual is we have a little more than is required on the left because they added like an extra sentence. There's a title, there's a picture, and then there's one component, which is this listing that they're reusing. And then the other one is a page that's about 4 times this length, and the hierarchy is changing, there's calls to action, but essentially the components tell a story. Number 4, encourage relationships over duplication. I mentioned this before. Relationships are a huge guardrail, especially at scale. So strategists will say COPE a lot, C-O-P-E, and that's not just because like the world's on fire. It's because it stands for create once, publish everywhere. So just in case, we want to inhibit editors from duplicating content, at least by encouraging them and making it easier to reference existing entities. I've mentioned earlier the contacts or locations often getting dropped. So instead of that, we encourage authors to reference from an autocomplete before making something new without checking. So in this case, I just wanted to call out both paths are possible, but one is easier. This is an image of 2 different websites within the Georgia system, a directory and an agency page with slightly different formatting, but you can see their contact, hour, address kind of information mapping between them. Oh, this can also be solved off-site. So it's funny, like some of the great content strategy victories are something just not existing. So we won a debate with a health agency that wanted to put dozens of pages that were using CDC content onto their site, and we were able to just make those external links because the external link to the original source is the relationship. Now they don't have to keep that up to date. Our last principle is test against real people and real content. I know I've been talking mostly about authors, but I also mean site end users when possible. So I said before, I just ask an author how they'd make something and see if they have a go-to and if it's what I would hope that it would be, and see how they react to maybe an alternate component. It's very human to account for everything and still miss something, which is why that discovery and planning is so valuable. But I just threw in this Mike Tyson quote because punches really do happen. I suggest referring back to that collection of stuff you have, the unmentionables, and anything from your discovery, a pattern, but also that long thing. So I just saved a couple real titles that were in our kind of edge case from both systems, but they don't break the design anymore. Okay, proof. Take another break. So full disclosure, I was very tempted to do like a crazy live demo thing here, but I know that I talk a lot and I didn't want to let Adam participate. Just kidding. I was going to make fun of my commercial, but he's not here. So I will offer instead a different kind of proof, just like very quickly, some success happy ending stuff. These screenshots show the before and now of just a random sample Georgia agency, in this case Department of Revenue. So the first one, this is how most of the landing pages looked on each agency. They could have an icon list or a text list, or a promo for like 3 kinds of things, an event, a news post, etc. This is just one example, of course, of how they're using those components custom and relationally in action. I'm particularly proud of GTA, the technology authorities, particularly for iterating around needs. So they've been working on this platform for years and did not stop iterating when it launched. So I just wanted to show some of their pages and give that sense of variety. I included 2 quotes, this one for scale. So a project lead said, "I've seen so many stakeholders who I thought would never come on board turn the tide and become some of our biggest champions." I think, to me, this speaks to that power of discovery and workshops, and I consider one of my greatest skills just having that conversation to make something that actually works. And if you need to tickle somebody to get that to happen, then I don't know, figure that out, buy a feather. But it really helps. I had someone at one of these in a goals workshop. His first goal was for us to not screw it up, and a day later he was advocating for one of the ideas I was trying to get greenlit, and he essentially greenlit it. So it's amazing to get that kind of adoption. I wish I had more ROI statistic stuff, but I do really like that. These before and afters come from Iowa, specifically the Department of Transportation and its motor vehicle division. I wanted to celebrate in particular over the other agencies just because they championed user research and data. So they're always proving it with math. There's no egos. It's great. So this is a flexible system, and it is a low-quality image. So no slide could do justice to the width and depth of either of the platforms or the variety of what they've withstood. I want to speak also to, I'm talking a lot about people shoving soup in places, but it doesn't speak to the ways that authors and their content really excelled when they had the right foundation and guidance. So I like just this sampling of a couple different pieces in practice. I want to end on this particular quote because it represents something I personally chase. This stakeholder said, "I can't wait to record the reactions of our editors. Everyone who works on state government will be just so excited about this." So that's what I chase. Users that are actually excited by and engage with the platform, and it doesn't just rot after I've made this artifact. Okay, just wrapping up. We learned about the problems that can come up, not imposing limits, requiring the wrong amount, modeling for too few or too many, duplicating, and being on the wrong side of flexible. We peeked into the processes of workshopping and auditing and discovery, defining content types, relationships, and roles in modeling, as well as validating through iteration. And we covered principles to keep us on the rails. So establishing baselines, starting with restrictions, requiring anything, needing consistency, encouraging relationships, and testing. Finally, components are only as flexible as the models underneath them are structured to allow. I couldn't help myself. Look at how happy everybody is with the structure of the soup actually being in a bowl. So structure doesn't resist flexibility. It really enables that at scale. And given the amount of soup not in the house, I would say it's worth it. Thanks so much. I think I have 5 minutes for questions. Cool. Please.
How do you handle redesigns?
That's a big one. Do you mean just...
You already built everything is perfect. You that, and they 6 months after they say, oh.
Marissa, can you repeat the question out loud so we can hear it?
How do I handle redesigns?
Yeah, so let's say she built everything.
Thanks.
And 6 months later, next year, there's a new design, new content structure, some new elements, something is deprecated, not used anymore. So is this applicable?
I think so, but maybe I'm biased. I think it depends where you are in that timeline. If this has happened underneath you, I think you're on the soup slide where there's not a really easy way to get that smell out of the house. But I do think that for me, I come at everything with brutal curiosity. So I'm like, wow, this is awesome, this cool thing you did. Why did you make this? Hey, what happened? I'm just so curious. What happened to the other thing? And maybe it really wasn't meeting a need, or maybe they say, what thing? Because it's as simple as a reorg that left something not in use. So
You start over in general, or you just jump in somewhere in between, or
I think somewhere in between is important. It's important. I see what you're saying. Thank you. So do I start over, essentially? And I think that you always want to learn from what was there. And, you know, if you come in and say, we got it, and it's totally fresh, you're going to miss a lot of their insights. So I want to know, I will often ask what's already working. And the subtext of that is, what are you going to freak out about if it changes? Because it's working already and it doesn't need to be something else. And that's just cognitive load. And then what's the first thing you'd change? And so sometimes you can make a small tweak and it's a huge win. I've done a design sprint that felt more valuable than an entire redesign. But yeah, a lot of times starting over is an important way to build fresh. And I'm not even talking about the code, right? I mean, that's a whole different.
the content model. You start over with the content model, or if it's like even different platform, you were in Drupal and you move in somewhere else to microservices, and you need that you restructure the content. Should you just reuse what you have, or you just
So across
and start like from blank?
So across different platforms and content platforms, am I using the same content model? I am starting from it, but it's not necessarily going to shove into every place that I put it. So that's a great question. Like maybe it's something like that description where we found that actually we need a shorter one for this, or actually we're missing something for voice. And I know Georgia's done a lot of that where they're iterating, they're not starting over. So, I mean, if I'm on one platform versus another, programs and events don't really change, but the way that we post or engage with those things might. You might have something that's a little more narrative or a story type or something because it's more relevant in one place. So I would start with what you have. I'm never a designer to make something weird that people have to figure out what it is. I would start with a pattern and have a reason why not. Does that answer?
You suggest not to let it go and start over, but stick to it and kind of try to relate or try.
I want to see which parts of it are still good. I mean, the first time, the first question usually is, why am I here? Why are we redesigning this at all?
I don't know, new manager, new ideas.
Yeah. I think it's good to at least start those conversations to know for yourself. And if there's a place where you can really helpfully correct that, great. And if they're just letting you know how it is, also good information.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope that helps. Yes?
How would you condense the shopping process for the content types if the young client team has a tighter deadline or has a smaller budget, or do you think it's too important of a process to sacrifice any part of it?
Okay, that's a really good question. So if you have a tight timeline or a tight budget, do you reduce the size of your workshops? Do you lose them? Do you have to keep them because they're so important? Is that okay? Yeah, I would say that I believe in doing things scrappier versus not doing them. Perfect is the enemy of done. And so that was part of why I wanted to show the marker to say, here's a nasty thing I made and it worked and it didn't take that long. I think, yeah, if you can't have a 2-hour workshop, then you have a 20-minute workshop. Or you do the parts that really feel the least clear first, and then you come back to that other stuff when they love the first one, because now they want to do a little more of that. Or, we can show them just one introduction, and then maybe it becomes a tool that you can save for the next problem. Yeah, I definitely think even if you do workshops with paper, even if it's just people talking with a whiteboard, I think it's always better. And I'm not doing a very good job right now, but I try so much to demystify that. Like, you can have a marker, you can have like red yarn, it doesn't matter, you don't need the fancy kit, there shouldn't be a barrier with the tool. And so I think it's just around what timing feels comfortable for both of you. If there's something that you can do quick and say, all right, what's the 20% effort for 80% value? I'm happy to talk more about that if you want. Thanks. I think I'm over, so I'll leave it there.
You're good. There's nothing until like 3 o'clock here.
Oh, that's funny. I was like looking at 2:45. Okay. Any other questions? Just excited to let me go early. All right. Thanks so much for attending, really.